And since St. John wrote the Apocalypse in Greek, it is most logical that the name of the person would equate to 666 in Greek. And so we see Benedict XVI's name, the name Benedict, Benedictos in Greek, equates to exactly 666. And since the head or king belongs to the beast, if the number of the final king is 666, that can also truly be said to be the number of the beast. Now, what is the evidence that this mark in the hand or forehead that the second beast gives is a spiritual mark? The evidence is overwhelming that it's spiritual. It says that, and he shall make people to have a mark in their right hand or on their foreheads. Well, what's so interesting about this is in the Greek it means emblem or sign, and in the Latin Vulgate we have the word for mark, characterem. And I believe that this is clearly a spiritual mark because in the book of Exodus and in the book of Deuteronomy, God commands people to keep his words as a sign, quote, in thy hand, and as a thing hung between thy eyes. Exodus 13:16, speaking of his commandment, and it shall be as a sign in thy hand, and as a thing hung between thy eyes, for a remembrance. Between thy eyes, in other words, your forehead. He's saying his commands or his words must be that. Here again in Deuteronomy 11:18, hang them for a sign on your hands and place them between your eyes. End quote. Does that mean literally? Obviously not. This is a spiritual message here. Although some people did have some of God's commandments on their foreheads, and these were called phylacteries. And Jesus rebuked some of the Pharisees for having their phylacteries too big. We read this in Matthew 23:5, where he rebukes the Pharisees or condemns the Pharisees. He says, all their works they do for to be seen of men, for they make their phylacteries broad and enlarge their fringes. Okay? He's referring here to the fact that they would write the commands, some of them on their forehead. But obviously not everyone did that. It wasn't a literal command that everyone had to do that. And so it's a spiritual message. So the forehead and the hand are symbolic for having God's truth and his commandments before your eyes in your heart, observing them. And here's much more evidence that the mark of the beast has a spiritual fulfillment, at least on some level. In Apocalypse 9:4, we see that it was commanded them, quote, that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, nor any green thing, nor any tree, but only the men who have not the sign of God on their foreheads, end quote. So in Apocalypse 9:4, we see that the just have the sign of God on their foreheads. Is that an actual literal thing that people can see? No, not necessarily. It's a spiritual mark. In Apocalypse 7:2-3, we read that, quote, I saw another angel ascending, having the sign of the living God, and he cried out, hurt not the earth, nor the sea, nor the trees, till we sign the servants of God in their foreheads, end quote. Again, a spiritual sign. In Apocalypse 14:1, we see it again. Referring to the 144,000 just, it says that they, quote, have his name and the name of his Father written on their foreheads, end quote. Is that a physical mark? No, it's a spiritual mark. In Apocalypse 17:5, we read of the great harlot. It says, quote, and on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of the fornications and the abominations of the earth, end quote. So the whore of Babylon has her name on her forehead as well, a spiritual mark. In Apocalypse 22:4, we read of the just, quote, they shall see his face, and his name shall be on their foreheads, end quote. And so this is just overwhelming scriptural evidence that the mark of the beast has a spiritual fulfillment, at least on some level, okay? And when it talks about how the second beast caused people to have a mark in their right hand or in their forehead, I believe this is a spiritual mark given by Benedict XVI. And what's so interesting about this mark is that in the Latin Vulgate, the word for mark is characterem. That's the exact same word used in the Council of Trent in the Latin for the mark, the spiritual character That's why it's characterem, and it's even translated character in the Douay Rheims. It's a spiritual character which is given in the sacraments of baptism, confirmation, and holy orders. And I want to quote from the Council of Trent, Session 7, Canon 9, on the sacraments in general. It says that if anyone shall say that in the three sacraments, namely baptism, confirmation, and order, there is not imprinted on the soul a character, that is, a certain spiritual and indelible mark, on account of which they are not able to be repeated, let him be anathema. End quote. And so for the spiritual mark given in baptism, confirmation, and holy orders, the Council of Trent uses the word characterem. It's a character, an indelible character. The Apocalypse in the Vulgate, in St. Jerome's translation, he gives the same exact word for the mark in the right hand or forehead that the second beast gives. Now, what's additionally important is that in the sacraments, in the Catholic sacraments, the Christians are signed in their heads, in their forehead. For instance, in baptism, in confirmation, and in ordination, priests' hands are anointed. Okay? And so you have a reference to hand and head, hand and forehead. What I believe that refers to is that people are submitting to the beast, submitting to the anti-pope, who is also the beast, either by, as lay people, submitting to his new sacramental system, or as clergy, by receiving orders under him, being marked in the hand. And I want to quote from Father Herman Kramer's Book of Destiny. On the point of the forehead and hand, he says this, quote, "This alludes to the signing of the faithful in chapter 7. The foreheads of all Christians are signed in the sacraments, while the hands of the priest are also anointed. The false prophet may institute secret rites, through which the followers of Antichrist will be advanced by degrees into the deeper mysticism of his cult." End quote. And so he mentioned that this hand and head, the signing in the hand and head, seems to be quite similar to the signing in the sacraments. He didn't mention the issue of characterem and the similarity to the Council of Trent, and he refers to the second beast as the false prophet, and he thinks that maybe he's going to initiate secret rites. Well, what I think it is not that he's going to initiate secret rites, but it's referring to a new church and a new sacramental system as one of the ways by which people are submitting to the beast. Okay, having their hands anointed in these false rites and in submission to the anti-pope, who is also the beast. Now, this is not to suggest that anyone who has ever received a sacrament from a clergyman of the Vatican II Church is perpetually branded by the mark of the beast. No, I believe it's a general indication of how people are submitting to him, and that the beast, the anti-pope, assumes a hierarchical position in what people think is the Catholic Church, and that he is involved with new liturgical rites. And so we can see that the evidence that the mark of the beast in the hand and forehead, hand and head, is spiritual is overwhelming. We see it in the book of Exodus, Deuteronomy, all throughout the Apocalypse, how the just are spiritually marked on their heads. We also see how it parallels the signing in the sacraments. We see how the word parallels the spiritual mark, which the Church says comes in the sacraments. It's almost a counter mark which is given to those who have abandoned the faith and submitted to this counter church. Additionally, certain other verses about the mark of the beast shed even more light on this point. For instance, Apocalypse 14:9, it says, quote, "And a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If anyone shall worship the beast and his image, and receive his character in his forehead or in his hand, he shall have no rest day or night," etc. And so it connects the mark or character in the forehead and hand, which I'm saying is a spiritual mark, I believe, with worshiping the beast and his image. And that fits because if Benedict XVI is the second beast getting people to worship the Antichrist, it would make sense that the spiritual mark which comes with submitting to him is also linked up with worshiping the image. And we see that clearly in this verse. And we find that repeated in the verses which mention how those who submit to the beast are damned. So there's a connection between submitting to the beast, submitting to the counter church, and worshiping the image. We see the same thing in Apocalypse chapter 20, verse 4. It speaks of those who had overcome, who had, quote, not worshipped the beast, nor his image, nor received his character on their foreheads or in their hands, and they reigned with Christ, end quote. And so we see, again, the linkage between the mark in the hand and head, which I believe is spiritual, with not worshipping the beast or his image.